Lost our rhythm on the floor again. Been together so long we can't pretend. Remember the way we used to move, dance all night like young lovers do. Your heart is changing. Now we don't dance like we used to. Silent disco on the floor, baby. Mr. DJ, he'll get me through. When the beat's gone, you can't save me, baby. Smoke and mirrors, pretty lights. Another runaway city boy.
This is Broad Radio. For you, by you. Broad Radio. Here for more.
Hello and welcome to Broad Radio this Tuesday morning. My name's Jo Stanley and my co-host today is the delightful Kerrie Stanley. Hi there, Kez.
Hello. How are you today? And straight off the bat, happy half-year anniversary, 6 months. Way to go, Broad Radio.
Oh, I know. My goodness, this is episode 25. So yeah, we launched 5th of January. So it's been an awesome 6 months as we've kind of got to know each other, got to know what we're talking about, worked out how our systems work with beautiful Ro over there, who's running a very smooth operation now. So yeah, it's been a gorgeous 6 months. Thanks so much, Kez.
Oh, congratulations to you, Jo. It's amazing what you're doing and pushing through everything with all the hurdles, tech being one of them, of course. Well done, Ro, and to all of your amazing guests and co-hosts that you've had on. And thank you for having me on. Hello.
Oh, I love it, Kerrie. I love having you. So today it's a really interesting show. I'm here to learn today. We're going to be learning about our hormones with women's health expert Nat Kringoudis. And I'm ashamed to say, Kerrie, I'm like 48, turning 49 soon. I know very little about my own hormones. Isn't that mad?
Me too, absolutely. I think the most I've kind of thought about it was going through menopause and now out the other side. And I know we're not going to be really talking about that today, but that's kind of the only time I've really paid attention to it. Yeah, I'm here for all the learning today as well.
Yes, and we're going to be telling you about an amazing campaign that Women's Health Victoria have pulled together. It's called Shequel, and it's a movement for advertising equality. We're going to be joined by Fran Clayton, Chief Strategy Officer at DDB Sydney, to learn what needs to change to stop sexism in advertising. It's all around us and it impacts all of us much more than we think. So cannot wait for that conversation, and that's all coming up after this. Broad Radio is proudly supported by Chemist Warehouse. Chemist Warehouse, great savings every day. So, Kerrie, just a little bit of housekeeping up the top before we get into our meaty conversations today. If you're watching on YouTube, we'd love it if you could like and subscribe. If you're watching on Facebook, chuck us a like and a follow. And of course, you can always catch up with our podcast anytime you like. All of our episodes are there, Broad Radio on the go, wherever you listen to your podcasts. And we love it when you join our conversation. So if you want to comment throughout today's show, we'd love to hear what you think and feel around what we're talking about. And we always invite you to enter our More to Say poll. It's a one question poll that we run every week. And Kerrie, this last week we asked the question, Mayor of Easttown is reminding us how awesome lady detectives are. Who is your favourite? And I don't think it's a surprise to you that Mariska Hargitay as Olivia Benson in SVU has come in at number one. You're a big fan?
You don't have to be a lesbian to be a big fan, but considering I am, woo!
What is it about her? I've never really kind of watched the show. So where's the joy?
Oh, I think, having such a strong character on the screen, it's been going for 23 years now, I think. And she's been in every single season. What a gal. Yeah, she's powerful. She's present. Yeah, she's straight, but that's all right. We overlook that. She's just a great icon for our community. Isn't it funny? I don't know why we all just go, whoa, yes. And she looks good in a suit.
Well, maybe that's partly it. I mean, suits
that's
aren't
a bit
always
stereotype, isn't it?
Oh, no, but she is a super powerful character, a role, I suppose. And, to have that lady detective, I mean, she was one of the first, wasn't she?
Yes, yeah, she was. And if you follow her on Instagram, as I do, she's got a really big following, and she does use her platform to, for great advocacy as well. So she's a great all-around amazing woman. Well done.
Awesome. Well done to the Broad Radio audience who chose her.
Yes.
Now, our next survey is relating to menopause, actually. So next week on the show, we're going to be chatting with Dr. Rosie Worsley, who is an endocrinologist from Gene House for Women's Health. And we're going to be talking about menopause and perimenopause with her. So we really want to get a sense going into that interview where our audience is at with menopause and perimenopause. There's 2 stages to it, hence we're saying both. But we want to know, how much do you know about menopause? Because I think people frequently go into it really having absolutely no idea. So we'd love you to get on board and answer our More to Say poll. Just head to broadradio.com.au and you go in the running for winning $100 of delicious biscuits of your choice at Charlie's Fine Food Company. Delicious, oh my goodness. So, of course, you can always head to charliesfinefoodco.com for a little bit of a shopping spree on biscuits. Who doesn't love biscuits? So, head along, and I look forward to learning what our audience knows or believes or their experience of menopause has been for them. So, Kerrie, happy Pride Month to you. It is Pride Month.
Thank you. It is Pride Month.
I would love to get from you an understanding of how important it is.
Yeah, well, Pride Month in Australia, I think, is kind of a relatively new-ish, celebration. I think due to social media, it's really come to the forefront. It's certainly been really big overseas. It did start as an homage to the 1969 Stonewall riots that happened down in the East Village, which was confrontation between patrons and the police. And so that happened in June 69, June 1. 69. And so, it's now held every year around the world to commemorate and also to celebrate and to bring awareness to our communities. In fact, in Australia, the first Sydney Mardi Gras was held in June in 1978. And so if you actually kind of hear the term the 78ers around Mardi Gras, it's to commemorate and pay homage to those people that were in that very first march down Oxford Street, which was met with police violence, even though they did actually get permission to do the parade. It was then revoked, but they still did it anyway. It was a peaceful protest, and it was met with a clashing with police. Many arrests were done. Many people were outed because names were printed in the paper. It was a really tumultuous time. And so they held the parade in Sydney again a couple of times, but then it was voted to move to summertime, and it's since stayed there ever since. Mm-hmm. So yes, so originally Pride Month. So we do celebrate Pride Month in Australia now. Sydney actually has a big contingency around that as well. And we've also been awarded upcoming in 2023 World Pride, which is going to be absolutely amazing. It's held every couple of years in different locations around the world, with Sydney being allocated that coming up. And so that's going to be an incredible, not only celebration, but a time for advocacy as well. They are running a human rights conference over 3 days. So it's not just the party and the glitz and glamour. There's also some serious issues that we'll be discussing around that time as well.
Yeah, I think it's really important to acknowledge, and for many people perhaps, if you really haven't done a deep dive into the history, it's important to acknowledge the activism that has come through many, hundreds of years really. People who were very oppressed and abused, and some people lost their lives in the fight for freedom to live as you are, basically. It's really important to acknowledge that. And also, though, that huge part of Pride Month, which is celebration, and I have snaffled a little photo of you and your partner, Lexi.
Yes. Yeah, that's Lexi, aka Sexy Lexi, and myself at a big party in Sydney. Yes, we managed to get there last Friday night, and yeah, that was part of Pride Month celebrations in Sydney at Glitterland. And Sexy Lexi is the original glamour boy drag king performer around the world. She was the first to do this, and yeah. Thank you. We looked sparkly, didn't we?
You really look like you're having the time of your life, and I've got to tell you, I'm green with envy. I want to be at that party. It looks so
great.
awesome.
It was, I think too, it was, was one of the first ones back after kind of everything that's gone on, as we know, and it was heaving. It was like a mini big Mardi Gras after party. Great people, great times. It was, nice to have a good boogie, I have to say.
Well, happy Pride Month to everybody around the world. I think it's a really beautiful time, and we're with you in celebrating and commemorating. While we're on topical news, before we get to our first guest, I just need to mention, with much discussed, the return of Barnaby Joyce as leader of the National Party, and now, because of that, our Deputy Prime Minister. So there's been considerable outrage around his appointment, and for us here at Broad Radio, it's largely down to the fact that somehow history gets erased, and it's enraging that the fact that he resigned as leader of the National Party because of a sexual harassment allegation that was never actually resolved. So that hasn't gone away. He did claim innocence. He said that he denied the allegations, but the woman, Catherine Marriott, who claimed that she was subjected to sexual harassment at his hand, she lodged a confidential complaint with the federal branch of the National Party, and somehow that was leaked. This is way back in 2016. So how devastating for her that the situation was leaked. She ended up on the cover of the front pages. That was a pretty unfortunate thing for her. She said it was absolutely terrifying for her. There was an investigation. He denied it, as I said, but those allegations never were resolved. And so he resigned at that time. And now he's back. And this is a year where we have turned to our politicians, and particularly our government, to say, tell the women of Australia that you are hearing us, that you support us, that you know that you're going to change the culture within Parliament House, and then this has happened. And it really kind of sends a message that maybe we're not being heard, and maybe our government is not putting women's safety and respect for women at the forefront. It's pretty disappointing.
Yeah, Joe, and full transparency, I know I've said this to you before, like I tend to avoid politics. I think it's just due to a lack of understanding, but no more. Like it's time, it's up to me to start to really open my eyes and not just go, I can't deal with it, but to actually have a good understanding of it. And this is case in point, exactly what I personally need to be looking at as well, and going, okay, why? Like it's being across it all now and go, okay, and if this last year has taught us anything, we need to be, like we said, we've been let down by our politicians. Now we need to have I need to have an understanding of why, and yes, knowing this about this man. Okay, I need to be across it a whole lot more.
The other alarming thing is that he's pretty close to a climate change denier. I mean, he's not supportive of a zero net emissions scheme at all, which that to me is betrayal of our future. Like he has 2 young children, 2 and 3-year-old children. Like, don't you want our world to be a better place for them and to actually provide them with, a planet to live on? It enrages me from that point of view too. So it's a pretty disappointing result for our country. As far as, particularly for this woman, Catherine Marriott, who I know went through a very traumatic time, and I'm thinking of her, I have to say, because I think this would be very difficult for her. It does remind me of a great story though, and I'm a comedian, so I always like to end on a laugh.
Please.
Okay, so it reminds me of a story, Kaz, when Gough Whitlam was in Parliament once, and what was effectively a Nationals politician back then in Parliament called out to Gough Whitlam, "I am a country member," to which Gough said, "I remember." I am a country member. Anyway.
Well done.
Oh, well done. Thanks, Gough. Let's get to our next guest after this. All right, we want to tell you about this amazing campaign from Women's Health Victoria that we are really getting behind. It's called Shequel, and it's all about calling out and ending sexism in advertising. Obviously, we are surrounded by advertising all the time, and the fact is that it informs really the way we see ourselves, it informs our relationships with each other, and often it limits who we know ourselves to be. So we're very, very passionate about this campaign. It's a campaign that empowers us to drive for change, basically, because all of us, doesn't matter what our role is, whether we work in advertising, whether we work in media like we do, or even just as consumers, we do have the power to make a difference and to push for change. So this has been backed up by some of the industry's most powerful and influential organisations, including DDB Sydney. And joining us from DDB now is Chief Strategy Officer Fran Clayton. Good morning, Fran.
Morning, Fran.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
It is so lovely to have you on Broad Radio. Can I be facetious to begin with? And so sexism can take many different forms in advertising, whether it's underrepresentation of women or diverse kinds of women, whether it's gender stereotypes. So we're seeing, women only as mums or grandmas or, carers, or whether it's highly sexualizing women. So to be facetious, what is your worst kind of sexism in advertising?
That's a great question. For me personally, the journey kind of started right at the beginning of my career when I was sort of told by a client that we had to target household shoppers, women, for a certain brief, and I think it was for bread. I mean, men eat bread too, right? And I remember feeling kind of enraged at this idea that we had to continually write women into a role. And I think that's actually, it's bigger than a gender issue. It's about the role that advertising plays to either perpetuate narrow stereotypes or to challenge them. So personally, that's what I'm passionate about, is how can advertising, start to challenge and shift some of these stereotypes that can, at worst, can really write people into roles in society and culture that are limiting for them.
Fran, how challenging are you finding this? Like, a passion, of course, is great to be behind it, but who's got your back behind you? And also, and how is it a slow burn? Or are you getting frustrated with the changes or lack of?
I think it feels like it goes in fits and starts. I feel like the last, year and certainly the last couple of years, there have been huge changes and quite a bit of progress in certain areas. But then, to the point about Barnaby Joyce, it feels like we take 10 steps back as quickly as we move forward. It's always there as a challenge, and it's about looking for the opportunities where they present themselves. So there are some, I work for DDB, and we have a range of amazing clients, and some of those clients are further on in their journey in terms of more progressive representation of women and other minorities in advertising. So when those opportunities present themselves, you sort of really push into that and take that opportunity. The work that we do with Westpac is certainly a beautiful example of that. And then there are some clients who are, a little bit further back on their journey. And that can be a matter of, it's hard to let go of the past, and it's hard to kind of let go of a view of your consumer that perhaps is outdated, and start to think about your audience in a new way.
So I'm really passionate about this, Fran, because there is very robust research to show the impact on our girls as they grow, and then further into our adulthood, when we are surrounded by images of really skinny women, when we're surrounded by images who are only ever seen as sexualised, it impacts on the way men, their attitudes, and boys as they grow, what their attitudes, So what do you know of the harmful impacts of this kind of sexism in advertising?
Yeah, there is a lot of good evidence now to back this up. I think it's something we all intuitively know. And that is that advertising, and probably media in general, it sets it sort of sets the tone for what is okay, what is acceptable, and also what is aspirational, what is desirable. So when we perpetuate stereotypes of women in certain roles, or the objectification of women, the over-sexualization of women, and actually men too, what that says is this is what society expects of you. And because advertising works, a huge amount of the time, advertising is working on a less conscious level, right? In fact, human beings, most of the time, going about our lives in a less kind of conscious way. So all of these things we take in, we might not kind of weigh them up and really analyze them and make informed choices about them at the time. They sort of, I remember hearing a quote, we marinate in the culture, and we might not know how much it's shaping us. So as women, it shapes our own self-image and our esteem. But for men, it also lets them know what's acceptable. And men who are exposed to, more advertising and media that objectifies or sexualizes women are more likely to think that, or to be tolerant of sexual harassment and sexual abuse. So it's this notion of what's okay and what is not okay. And advertising plays a big role in framing that up for society at large.
Well, I really liked what you said, Fran, about saying looking at things in a less conscious way. I know that I'm quite aware of that too. Just, we see so much imagery, scrolling, of course, doing this, glancing over something. So like your brain's just taking in all this information, which I think is very poignant when you said like it's just kind of popping in and then leaving, but it's there, we see it. It's around.
Yes.
But I came across this great term. I was reading this article yesterday, and it's called sneaky sexism. And I thought that title alone just kind of grabbed my attention. And it was put out by a consultancy business in the UK that specialises in female audiences. And they were saying, like, if I can quote them, it's the same trick of saying you need to change, but it's moved from physical appearance to behaviour and attitude, which is just as damaging. And I thought that was really interesting. Are you finding that as well? Like, it's because you were saying before, like with some of your clients are there and some are not. So you're kind of, you're in a role of having to educate your clients as well as get your creatives on board as well. So it's this kind of two-pronged direction with it. So how do you feel about that? Are you seeing clients kind of seeing that change, or are you having to work in that different mold as well?
I think that's interesting. And I think that, the baby steps are sort of about representation, right? Are we seeing diverse audiences? Are we seeing minorities in advertising and in the media? But for me, that's like base camp, because it's actually about the role that we're playing, right? So if women are continually in supporting roles, not in kind of leading roles, or in roles that we don't typically get portrayed in, and in categories, right? So you look at financial services, for years, it really only spoke to men. And the implications of that, when we think about gender inequality in a financial sense throughout women's lives. So I think it's, coming back to this notion of it's the role. And I think that goes to your point about the behavior. But the challenge, I think, is, yes, it's challenging for us in agencies to educate. Agencies still have a long way to go when it comes to diversity as well. And so do the client organisations or corporate culture in general, right? Because it's only until very recently that we're seeing more representation of women and minorities in leadership roles in corporate culture. So that's the context that advertising comes out of. And
I want to acknowledge that we are, three white women speaking about this, and so there's an element of diversity even in broad radio that we sometimes fall short of, and it's critical that advertising really brings diverse images, women with disabilities, women of colour, women over 45 having an active life. What about that? That would be extraordinary. But what I find really strange, and maybe you can help me with this, Fran, is it feels like the audience is way ahead of the creatives a lot of the time, way ahead of the brands. And I'm thinking specifically of Victoria's Secret, who have only just rebranded from the Angels, which is this, you know, completely unattainable and bizarre ritual that they had every year, in which they would wear lingerie that nobody would wear ever. Like, it was completely impractical. This ritual, to now they've rebranded to what they're saying is, you know, that the world has changed and we've been too slow to respond to it. And I'm quoting from Martin Waters, who is from Victoria's Secret, and he's saying we needed to stop being about what men want and to be about what women want. And they've got this extraordinary group of beautiful women of very diverse backgrounds and very different shapes, and, you know, representing lots of different parts of society, I suppose you'd say. But why would it take something like a Victoria's Secret so long to understand that of course it's about what women want, not what men want? Of course the audience has moved on, and we want something that actually reflects our lives and who we are.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great point that you made about how culture moves more quickly than corporates. What I find fascinating actually about the Victoria's Secret example is that, you know, that show was incredibly successful for them and built a kind of an empire. And then, you know, culture can actually shift quite rapidly, which is fascinating to me. So it was, you know, this fall, you know, the fall of the Angels and Victoria's Secret kind of happened around the time of the last sort of 4 or 5 years with Me Too emerging in such a powerful way. And, you know, and perhaps this new generation, or just maybe it's a critical mass and a tipping point where there's enough conversation that we ourselves as women also question, why were we into that? You know, that show had pageantry and drama and pop, you know, it turned those supermodels into pop cultural icons, and people tuned in all over the world. And how quickly culture changed to say no longer are we interested in that, no longer is that acceptable. And you know, and then sadly there's this really awkward time for the business. It finds itself very out of step, very late to the party, looking like a little tokenistic, to be honest. And it will have to, I think, put in some genuine effort. You know, I was reading something actually about Victoria's Secret. They haven't even changed their sizing yet. So, you know, how serious are they about it? Or perhaps it's just going to take them a while to catch up. You know, I think a better example is Barbie, because it's kind of in the same world, right? Like, I think there were some researchers in Finland who revealed that if there was a human being with the proportions and body fat of Barbie, the original, that woman wouldn't be able to stand up. So, you know, Barbie sales were falling off a cliff, similarly to Victoria's Secret, right? But probably over a longer period of time. And that's not because kids didn't want to play with dolls, right? Role play is such an important part of childhood. But Barbie's transformation in recent times has been really cool, because it's, you know, looking at the product, from the product out, how does that change? More realistic body shape, different, you know, representation of different ethnicities, but also the roles that Barbie's playing, you know, the diversity of those roles and how important that is. You know, I think 0 to 5 years is the most formative, kind of shapes our identity the most. And the nice thing about that is there's a commercial success story. So now Barbie is actually driving top line growth for Mattel. So it's important, you know, inclusivity and positive, progressive gender representation is important for, first and foremost, socially. but it's also important commercially.
Yes. Well, how then can consumers make a difference, Fran? We've got this amazing Shequel campaign, and if you go to Shequel, you can get a reporting sexist advertising toolkit, which is empowering the consumer to actually, I don't know, speak up and say, I don't like what I just saw. But what kind of power do you think the consumer has?
Yeah, I love that. I love that, if you do notice it consciously and you want to do something about it, that it is becoming easier to call it out and say no. But I think the great thing is that consumers are already doing something about it, because more progressive gender representation in advertising is more effective advertising. And there's an organisation that's quite similar to Shequel, called the Unstereotype Alliance, and it's a collaboration with the UN. So it's working kind of on a global scale. And they have partnered up with a big research company, and they're able to look at when they test advertising for its effectiveness. They add a little question, which is, asking people whether they felt that women were portrayed in progressive roles and in progressive ways in this advertising. And advertising with a really high score in this area also scores really highly when it comes to things like purchase intent. So consumers are actually already the driving force for change. But what I like is that, if you do consciously see this, you can call it out through, I feel like we're so much more empowered in general now. You can kind of take to social media and have a go at that company. Or you can look at organisations like Shequel, which are kind of driving policy change and also providing consumers with ways to protest.
Yeah, I think that's really key, don't you reckon, Kerrie? If we just go, I'm not buying that product anymore, I'm calling that out.
Absolutely. You lead with your dollars, don't you? Like that's how we're seeing change. It's such a great website. I did a bit of a deep dive into it the last couple of days as well, Fran. So congratulations on it. I think it's great for all of us to have a read of and get behind it and certainly report when necessary.
Yes. Thank you so much, Fran Clayton. It is so interesting.
Pleasure.
And I'm really pleased that there are people like you leading the way within the industry, because without your leadership, nothing's really going to change.
Exactly. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Fran.
Thanks, Fran. And we'll have more Broad Radio after this. Well, at Broad Radio, we are growing because of the partnerships that are supporting us. We're very grateful to them. And at Broad Radio, we believe in caring for each other, for ourselves and the planet, which is why we're so pleased to be partnering with Saba Organics, one of the world's only 100% certified organic range of skin and body care. So obviously, whether it is hand wash or hand sanitizer, or if it's cleaning products in your home, none of us want to be covering our skin in toxins or chemicals. But the real key is, how do we know what goes into the products that we use? Well, even when it's described as natural ingredients, that generally can still be something that is exposed to toxic herbicides and pesticides in farming, which is obviously damaging to the earth and our body. And I tell you, I've only really just learned that in the last couple of months. But Saba Organics is 100% certified organic, which guarantees no aluminium, no sulfate or parabens, and no toxic chemicals. So why wouldn't you think otherwise? And they work directly with Australian organic farmers, growers and suppliers, so they can offer the most accessible certified organics at the lowest prices. I love Saba Organics lemon tea tree. I'm going to say it again. I love Saba Organics lemon tea tree. It smells beautiful, and Kunzia hand wash, but you can check out their whole range at sabaorganics.com.
My workout routine comes with me wherever I go, and so does Bondi Protein. It gives me the post-workout nutrients I need. Fuel your body with Australian-made Bondi Protein.
Broad Radio. Talking inspo we love, info we need, and sharing more of us. Watch and listen live every Tuesday 9 a.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Savings Time at broadradio.com.au, or find us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube and LinkedIn at Broad Radio Oz. Talk to us live. Call on 1300 8 Broad. Catch up on demand anytime, anywhere, every time, everywhere. On the train, we'll be here. 2 a.m. existential crisis? We've got you covered. Broad Radio. Here for more.
So, Kerrie, it's time for something. If this was commercial radio, right, I would have a natty little jingle and someone would have voiced a title for this segment, which I'm calling Learning Things We Should Already Know. That's what we're here for today. That's right, learning things we should already know. Today, it's hormones. Learning things we should already know. I know not much about hormones, and they obviously make up a fair amount of what goes on in my body. So we're very, very pleased to welcome to the show Nat Kringoudis, who's a women's health expert. She's a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner and an acupuncturist. Good morning, Nat.
Good morning,
Nat.
Nat.
Hello, ladies. Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
I reckon you must hear that all the time from women. I don't know anything about my hormones. What even are they?
Yeah, all the time, because we're not, well, our generation, we were never taught properly. We got taught, don't have sex, you'll get pregnant. That was about it. That was the 101. And so we're here to, we have to learn this now for the next generation to change it. But we've got such an awesome opportunity to do that by learning ourselves or relearning ourselves to teach them and lead them properly.
Yeah, my children are grown up, so I left my run a bit late. But I think maybe for my grandchildren, whenever that may be, oh my God, no, that's down the track. But certainly, I'm just really keen to educate myself, for my friends that have young children as well. I think it's super important, and not just to think about hormones at menopausal time.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I really feel like this is how we change the landscape of women's health long term. And you're right, you might not have grandchildren yet, your children might be past that age, but I think it's always important that we're learning and we can pass on information to the next door neighbour's children or whoever it might be that you come across. And we also get to set an example. And I feel like that's the most important thing here. I get a lot of mothers say to me, how can I make my teenage daughter listen? And I'm here to tell you, you can't. You absolutely can't. But what you can do is you can be an example, and I think that's the most important thing. But if you're sitting there every month hating on your body, blaming it on your hormones, we do that all the time. I'm so hormonal, but what does that actually mean? If you don't know what that means, then, that's useless. We're very good at blaming it on something, and we're very good at complaining about it. So why would our children even want to understand their hormones if it's such a chore, if it's such a burden and drama? And this is why a lot of teenagers, especially I believe, are led to contraceptive methods, which I'm not here to argue whether or not children should take contraceptives or not, but I really want them to have the facts. And I really want mothers to have the facts when they're making choices for their daughters, because very often these contraceptive methods are prescribed when there's actually some type of imbalance that exists that probably needs to be fixed first before we utilise contraception. So it's about having these conversations to become curious. And my whole mission really is to help women understand their bodies simply so that they can make informed choices for their long-term health. And that came about because I was seeing so many women heartbroken because their fertility was just not where they thought it was going to be when they came off birth control. And I had this light bulb moment thinking, well, hang on a minute, I could actually reach out to the younger woman to help her understand what her symptoms are telling her, use those as clues, and maybe we could make some changes here for the better. But I feel like there's still this gap missing, and that's why it does start with us, definitely.
Okay, so there is so much that you just said then that I'm like, my head is spinning. Firstly, you're right. I had never had the side effects and the long-term impact of birth control and being on the pill explained to me, and I didn't make any effort to investigate that. So I think it's absolutely critical that we speak to our young women about that, and I think that maybe our GPs fall over when it comes to that kind of conversation because it's an easy fix, right?
Absolutely. Well, there isn't another solution. At the time when we're presented to our GP, that's the solution. for them at that point. Also, your GP doesn't necessarily have the liberty of time. They're on a very tight time schedule. When we, especially in alternative therapies, we set aside an hour and a half to sit with a patient, look at their lifestyle, look at their nutrition, look at the family history, look at their tests. And so I feel like that's an issue where maybe it's the gynecologist that is getting missed there as well. And I think that's a big piece of the puzzle when there is hormone imbalances. And we're seeing a lot of girls experience polycystic ovarian syndrome or endometriosis. And so these are going undiagnosed because we're going to the GP, we're presenting with symptoms, they're giving us the solution of birth control. And don't get me wrong, that can definitely buy some time to work out what needs to happen. But as a long-term solution outside of contraception, it can be problematic because if it's not actually treated at the time of diagnosis, then it goes untreated for many, many years. And so it's just about coming back and having that information. But our poor GP is doing the best that they can when they don't have a lot of resources and they don't have a lot of time necessarily. So I love this conversation because I think what it allows us to do is to become curious. And women are definitely doing this now more than ever before. We're asking questions when we're going to our healthcare providers. We're invested more than ever in our health, and we need to get solutions that are actually right for us individually, not a one-size-fits-all. And again, I think that's where the problem lies with birth control anyway, like you said, Jo.
Great that we're having this conversation now, because I was actually just talking to my best friend the other day, and she has, her daughter is 7 and is now experiencing, which is early onset puberty. She's got pubic hair, she's got hair on her arms, her moods are changing, and this young little poppet is 7 years old. Is this happening more and more, with our young girls starting to go through early onset puberty or precocious puberty or whatever we call it these days? And is that, can it be changed? How do you start that conversation? I know Ali is so worried about what her little one is going to experience at school, like in the change rooms when they go swimming carnival or any of that kind of things. She's the only one at the moment, and she's 7.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's becoming, for me, more and more common that I'm seeing patients present with precocious puberty. And I think often, usually I'm not the first point of call. And so we need to rule out anything serious with precocious puberty. And in all the patients that I've seen, thankfully, it hasn't been necessarily a serious problem where there's an issue with the pituitary or the brain. It's actually just been an early onset unexplained, and they've been left to sort of say, it'll be fine in the long run. But like you said, what about the short term? I think that there's more research that definitely needs to be done in this area. But I think the reason we're seeing this, in my opinion, is our lifestyle and heightened stress for mothers that are pregnant and expecting, but also heightened stress for children. So there is some research that indicates that when a mother is expecting and experiences high stress, it can activate the child or the unborn child's adrenals, and that may be a contributing factor. Still, like I said, more research needs to be done. But what I'm also seeing is heightened stress in these children, and then they're presenting with precocious puberty. And it's only something that I can't actually say there's enough research in, but in my opinion and in my experience, I've always been able to link it back to some type of childhood trauma. Whether it's been a loss of a loved one that was close by or something that was a traumatic experience for a child, that seems to activate, which makes sense, activate the adrenals, and we start to see this early onset. I think it's probably the perfect storm as well. Poor nutrition, not necessarily poor, but unknowing chemicals like we've talked about in the environment, in our foods, in our water, in our body products. They're all contributing factors. And then when I say the perfect storm, it probably also genetics. You need to look at the genetic pool as well. So there's lots of parts that we can pull on that then we might see this actually present for young girls. But it's definitely a real issue. And so what I found is if we can address those lifestyle factors and we can address those emotional stresses, then that can be something that can help to slow that down a little bit, which is nice news for the parents, because if there's nothing actually seemingly wrong, which A is good news, but still why is it happening, then you can start to do some other things to maybe slow it down so that they can have some time to catch up and go through puberty when their peers are going through puberty. But I mean, it's stressful enough getting your period as a 13-year-old. I can't even imagine what it would be like as a 9 or even 7 or younger. Like that to me, I can't even imagine.
Oh, it breaks your heart because emotionally they're not as mature as a 13-year-old. Obviously, they can't be. And then they're having to sort of manage something that is probably, it's a much more adult thing than perhaps they're ready for. But so going back to learning things we should already know, which is the title of this segment, Nat, when you talk about blaming our hormones, which is, I've done that my whole life. Like it's sort of, maybe it's a narrative that we're taught. How can we actually embrace whatever is happening with our body and our hormones? And what even symptoms would I be able to attribute to my hormones?
Yes, I love this question so much because like I said, and like you've just realised, we blame it on our hormones all the time, yet no one's really sat us down in our older years and gone, what does it mean? So I think we're also really good at complaining about our bodies, complaining about our symptoms, and not actually flipping that and asking ourselves, what is my body actually telling me? Mm-hmm. What do these symptoms mean? And could they actually lead me on a course of curiosity and discovery to learn what might be going on for me? And so when we start to flip it around and look at symptoms, and they can be anything from insomnia, missing periods, weight gain, hair loss or facial hair, acne, PMS, ovulation pain, I can keep on going. There's so many symptoms because hormones control everything. And we're talking about specifically our sex hormones and our stress hormones more than anything, and they tend to battle it out for each other. But if we can start to profile the symptoms, we can then start to work out what's actually going on. And I think that's really, instead of it being something that we have to hate on, we can start to find clues about ourselves, learn more about ourselves, and especially look at if our symptoms are cyclic. So if you're seeing a headache at the same time every month, yes, you can blame it on your hormones, but you can probably blame it on imbalanced estrogen levels if you can go down the rabbit hole, and we can look at what that means. Or very commonly as we get older, we're seeing lower testosterone levels, and that can be problematic with libido, vaginal dryness. We can, the symptoms are all very obvious. So don't hate on your symptoms. If you can just hear me out for a second, just start to let them become more curious with them. And the reality of that is when you can work out the imbalance, you can actually fix the problem, which is good news to many women, but it's not something, again, we've never really been taught.
Oh, I like that very much, listening to your body. And I think I find now that I'm 51 and out the other side of menopause that I'm really starting to, my body has changed so dramatically. I was very lucky, hormonally growing up. The only time I had any sort of inadvertent experiences when I had the injection contraceptive when I was about 24, I think I was, and it was horrendous. And then I've never had any contraception since. But I just find that, so when you wanted to do that research, is it really confusing? I find it a little bit confusing when you can get on the Dr. Google, which can be problematic in itself, and go down, as you said, rabbit holes. How do we know? I'm all into integrated medicine and alternative therapies. I love it myself. So how do we go down and how do we find out the answers without getting completely confused and what's right and what's not?
Yeah, there's a lot of resources out there, I think, which is really exciting. I know I've dedicated my whole career to helping women understand this. In fact, I always say I want to become irrelevant in my patients' and my followers' lives so that they're empowered and they've got all the information. But there's a lot of resources out there that allow us to do this. There's a lot of online information, quizzes that you can profile your symptoms in. I've got a really lame one on my website, which women absolutely love, that you can go in and look at. It's a little bit like a Dolly Doctor quiz. You go in and you're like, well, I'm mostly A's or I'm mostly B's. But just to start, it's not going to give you all the answers, but it's an opportunity to get curious, like I said, and look at what symptoms we're being presented with. Enough for you to then have an information to go to your GP and say, hey, I think it might be my hormones, and could we test them? And this is the other area where we want to make sure the right person's looking at our hormones and where we might need our gynecologist. Because if somebody doesn't understand how to read that can become problematic as well. So we want the right person. So someone who specialises in women's health and hormones is probably going to be better than somebody who just specialises in general health. But doing the tests on the right days and then looking at what our body is telling us alongside symptoms, not one and not just the other on their own, can really be very useful. And I want to say the majority of our symptoms I see for women is a direct result of our diet and lifestyle. So if you have a hormone imbalance and you don't know where to start, you start there. You start with your nutrition, you start with movement if you're not doing those things, and do it for 4 weeks and see where that lands you. But I don't know that it's never a dangerous thing to put out there to look at your nutrition and look at your movement. And I think that we can all benefit from that.
Nat, that's quite a revelation to me, because no one in my entire life since I got my period has said, what are you eating that's going to impact on your hormones? Like, I know that eating can impact on my moods. That's a fairly new thing, probably in the last 10 years. But no one's ever said, well, so what foods should we be eating for optimal hormone health?
Love this question. So there's a lot of research obviously now going into this area, and I learned something new the other week, and it was because I was talking to somebody about more so specific to fertility and women as we age. And there's some new research that's come out that has shown that we can not only improve our egg quality, but if we include enough fat and protein, and I'm talking about quality fats. So we know this now, right? Avocado, oily fish, nuts and seeds, good oils, that we can not only reverse the aging process, but we actually improve our egg quality. And they studied this in people over a 12-week or 3-month period, and some of them had reversed their age by up to 3 years. So that's great news to somebody who's sitting here listening going, I think I've missed the boat, I've run out of time to have children, or maybe you haven't. So I think the key takeaway is definitely fat and protein. And I think that's probably the one that we're getting more used to now, but it definitely was the thing that in the 90s, especially for me, you didn't touch fat. Fat was bad, and it was all about no sugar.
Totally. You wouldn't have put butter on your toast in the 90s. Never. No. Now you slather it on.
That's right. The bread is the carrier for the butter, right?
That's right.
That's why we have bread. Correct. So just adjusting that, and really that should be every meal. Every meal should include adequate fat, adequate protein, and adequate plants. And if we can look at it that way and try not to get too bogged down in it, that's the other thing. But if you're eating whole foods, again, you can't really get it too wrong. I don't think anyone's ever found themselves in too much trouble from eating, well, unless you've got terrible digestion, too much avocado or too much spinach, for example. But it is those inflammatory foods that do impact our gut, unfortunately, and they're the ones that we could eat all day, the sugar, the gluten, the dairy. So we're not here to say don't have those, but they are definitely on the sometimes list, and we can bring those whole foods back into our nutrition plan. The other one thing I will say that I feel is just as equally important is our stress levels. And our stress hormones are in direct proportion to our sex hormones. And that's why I said before, our lifestyle plays such a big role, and how you can, correlate that. But stress is at an all-time high. And I really feel like it's important to understand just the impact this is having on our sex hormones. It literally pulls the brake on our sex hormones. So that impacts all of these symptoms we were talking about, but especially our fertility. And so being mindful around stress becomes one of the biggest gifts I teach patients. And it just starts with exactly that. I want you to be mindful of when you're feeling overwhelmed. And if you can be aware of when you're feeling overwhelmed, just being aware of it is enough for you to be able to say, oh, here I am again. Maybe I need to pull up on that. I don't need to waste my precious stress hormones, upset my sex hormones, all because someone upset me at work or because I'm running late to pick the kids up. So just become aware of stress, I think, is really important as a hack as well. Yeah.
Do you know what, Nat? I was trying to get pregnant when I was doing breakfast radio, and I am convinced that's why I was only ever able to have one child, because I just was so fatigued, and my, all of my hormones were just depleted completely. I'm convinced of that.
Do you know what, Joe? I think also, I look, there's evidence to suggest that definitely we can do it all, but we don't always get to have it all, right? And something has to give with that. And I think as women, we're amazing multitaskers. We've been able to achieve more than, women have in how many centuries. And I love that. But at the same time, there does come a moment where we might have to actually create space for fertility. And this is the one thing that I think this doesn't get spoken about. You might even go to your fertility specialist, and some of my patients have been told that their stress doesn't matter. And unfortunately, the evidence now is out there to say it absolutely does on every level, whether it's nutritional stress or lack of nutrition, when it comes to body clocks like you're talking about, having to wake up early. There's so many different stresses alongside trying to juggle so many balls in the air and do everything, and environmental stresses and all these, it's coming at us from all angles. So it is important that we can do the basics to get that, at least those foundations set up, so that we can almost have our cake and eat it too.
Yeah. Oh,
Great advice.
What a great first episode of Learn Things We Should Already Know you've brought to us, Nat.
Oh, there's plenty more where that came from.
I know. We could talk for hours. Unfortunately, we're getting to the end of the show. But the interesting thing to me that you have really highlighted is that we just assume our bodies just go on mechanically because we don't have to think about it. That's just what they're there to do. But actually, we do need to prioritise and make the space. What a great message, Kerrie. Oh my God.
Yeah, fantastic. I work in breakfast television, so I'm well aware of those hours. I'm not into fertility now, obviously, but I find my weight gain is definitely in correlation with working those hours and not much sleep.
Yeah.
You know what? The other thing I will just say as we close out is that as women, we're always going through phases, whether it's whether we're at perimenopause or menopause or postmenopause. The phases don't stop. We keep on going through cycles, and I think we kind of bunch years together. We go, 20 years of perimenopause, and then 10 years of menopause, and then the rest of our life postmenopause. But we're still going through cycles, so it's important to be able to constantly assess, what are the symptoms? What is my body telling me? And how can I use this information to actually get what I need and get what I want, and not having to live with what I don't want?
Ugh, it's so great to hear. But I tell you, it's exhausting. But great to be empowered, right? It's great to be empowered.
Great conversation.
Well, if we start from the beginning, then it won't have to be exhausting. That's the takeaway, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
Let's start at the beginning and be empowered for all of our days, and empower our children as well.
Oh, thanks,
Great
Nat
message.
Kringoudis. It's just been fantastic to chat with you. Make sure you head to Nat's website, which is natkringoudis.com.au, maybe, I'm guessing?
No AU, just
No
.com.
AU.
Just .com. Yeah, we're international these days, or we like to think we are anyway.
That's right. So, head along to Nat's website if you want to learn more. I know that she's a wealth of knowledge. Thanks so much, Nat.
Thank you, Nat.
Thank you so much.
And we'll have more Broad Radio after this. Oh, Kerrie, I've learned so much.
That was good. So good. Yeah, it's interesting. You know, I know, Jo, you are very big on mindfulness. You know, you talk very openly about it. I know it's a practice of yours. I've recently gotten into that practice as well. I did a little course a couple of weeks ago when in our lockdown, and so I'm trying to get on top of that as well. But it was interesting what Nat was just saying about, you know, we're still going through the cycle, so we still have to listen to our bodies to see what we need. I think that was a great conversation.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting too. And as I said, we are going to be talking about menopause and perimenopause next week as well. That'll be learning things I didn't already know as well. There's a whole list.
I'll be listening to that one.
Yeah, but the interesting thing that Nat said there around that you, even after postmenopause, you are still going through cycles, because there's an assumption that kind of, put a tick in that box, you're done, and then you just basically kind of live out your days waiting for the end. Like, that's the way menopause is written about, and it's just not true. And your body is still going through incredible changes, and it's because it's a life force, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I found with me, I was always able to eat and drink whatever I liked my whole life. I maintained a smaller frame, but now that I'm not, I have to be really conscious of it, and I eat really well. I move now. I'm like, okay, but things aren't shifting. I'm not quite comfortable. So, I'll take up some more advice of Nat's and look into that a whole lot more. I think it's the lack of sleep, definitely. It's the lack of sleep doesn't help. I know. I've been told that, and I completely agree with it.
And that is a sheer hell for you. And because you do breakfast radio hours, Kerrie, my heart goes out to you. I know.
You know it all too well.
I know the trauma of it. But just on mindfulness too, and the interesting thing about mindfulness is that it teaches you to listen to your body, and our bodies are a map of what we're feeling. You know, our body holds, there's a great book out there called Body Keeps the Score, and our body holds all of the things that we felt now, but also in the past. And it's a really interesting thing to explore. It can be traumatic and really upsetting at times too. But, you know, I'm learning the older I get to really engage with the messages my body is sending. And it's a lovely thing.
Yeah, amen to that.
Yeah.
I completely agree. What are we going to finish up with, Jo? Got a little story for me?
Okay, so last night you would have been aware that the ABC ran their show around the survey that they did, Australia Asks. Is that what it was called? Australia Asks? I can't remember. Anyway, Australia Talks. They asked, and then Australia Talks.
They asked, and then we chatted, yeah.
And it was a bunch of questions around our lifestyle and our views and opinions. And according to Twitter, the most controversial question was, how often do you change your bed sheets?
Yes, I heard the results of that. That's not good. It was a little bit disgusting.
Yeah, Australians don't do their laundry as much as they need to. But it made me laugh because to compare that and the outrage around whether or not people are doing their laundry on the ABC, in Norway, their national broadcaster have just released a different kind of piece of information, and that is a very extensive sex guide. It's a guide on, I think, up to 60 different positions that might be useful to you, particularly if you have a dodgy back, if you're pregnant, if you've got dodgy knees. They've got something for everyone there, and I just love that. Good old Norway, and that's like their equivalent of the ABC have released that.
Look, I wonder if it actually came with photos too. It actually just reminds me of something I discovered one Christmas, pre-Christmas. I was a wee child, of course, hunting through the house for hidden Christmas prezzies. And of course, looked in the bottom of my parents' cupboard, and I there discovered a couple of books on sex. One was 101 Positions, completely photographed, right? And this was from the 70s. And I think this is why I'm not really into leopard print, because the man was in a leopard print G-string. And of course, the woman was topless. Imagine that. And I was just like, what is this?
Oh my God! How totally traumatized.
I would have been maybe. I obviously didn't believe in Santa, so I don't know how old I was. Maybe 8 or so. I don't know.
Wow!
Talk about a little education early.
Yeah, it's too young to see a man. Oh, this is the photos from the guide from Norway. I mean, you're right. 8 is too young to see a man in a G-string, whether it's leopard print or not. It's highly traumatic. But I love this conversation around obviously sex being about health and relationships. It's not grubby, it's not dirty, it's not something that's shameful. I just really love that. And obviously making it accessible for all different kinds of people and experiences, because, you know, well, we're not Victoria's Secret models, are we? And Ro, you were telling me about an amazing book. This is Ro, our producer, off screen there.
Good morning.
Hi, Ro. Hello, you were telling me about an amazing book. Yes, called?
Curvy Girl Sex.
Curvy Girl Sex.
Yeah, so the fabulous Elle Chase, who's an LA-based sex educator, very, very body positive in her approach. And a couple of years back, she produced an absolutely magnificent book for people with larger bodies and also people with different abilities. So it's all about finding all sorts of magnificent positions and tools and devices and things that just help make sex easier. It's fantastic. So Curvy Girl Sex, Elle Chase.
Oh, we'll have to get Elle on at some point. Yeah, we'd love to invite her on Broad Radio.
That'd be a great chat. That'll be things we learn.
Yeah, that's right. Things I should have known.
Keeping in the new Broad Radio tradition.
Learning things we should already know. Kerrie, it's been a delight to share this last hour with you. Thanks for joining me on Broad Radio today.
Likewise. Great conversations. Thank you, Jo.
Yeah, you have a great week, and we will be back with Broad Radio Tuesday, 9 a.m. next week. Till then, take care.